Hooray, we're all live.
It's a real thing. The house meant to set.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. Left Bank Books is presenting author and professor Greggor Mattson, who will discuss Who Needs Gay Bars? Bar Hopping Through America's Endangered LGBTQ+ Places. And Mattson will be in conversation with the founder of the St. Louis LGBT History Project, Stephen Lewis Brawley. Tonight's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, and it keeps our bookstore open, keeps our roads paved, our libraries funded, the parks free, and all the other wonderful things that make St. Louis a beautiful place to live. I want to thank you all for shopping local and supporting this event tonight. And we also want to welcome our virtual audience. And my name is Elena Jove, and I'm a bookseller here at Left Bank Books. And we are very happy to be producing great in-person events this fall. This Sunday, October 22nd, we will be hosting Schuler Baylor to discuss his new book, He, She, They, How We Talk About Gender and Why It Matters, at the High Low Listening Room at 4:30 p.m. You can go to our website, left-bank.com, for a full list of all of our programming for readers of all ages. So I'm going to quote Samantha Allen, author of Real Queer America and Patricia Wants to Cuddle, about tonight's book. Breathtakingly intimate and yet vast in scope, this passion project balances sharp insights with the kind of lived-in details that make you want to pull up a stool and stay a while. And so about tonight's author and conversation partner. Greggor Mattson, PhD, is an author and professor of sociology at Oberlin College and Conservatory, where he teaches courses on sexuality, nightlife, and cities. He is the author of The Cultural Politics of European Prostitution Reform, Governing Loose Women. His work has appeared in the Annual Review of Sociology, as well as in Slate, Literary Hub, Business Insider, and the Daily Beast. Stephen Lewis Brawley is a public historian noted for his research related to the LGBTQIA+ and pop culture topics. He is the founder of the St. Louis LGBT History Project and Executive Vice President for Area Resources for Community and Human Services. Brawley is the author of Gay and Lesbian St. Louis and is also a frequent lecturer at the educational institutions and a presenting member of the Organization of American Historians. We're going to pass the mics over here. This one for you. And this one for you. Thank you.
Let the audience vote.
Does the audience at home need the mic to be able to hear us?
They don't need it. It makes it a little clearer, but it's not necessary.
If it makes it clearer, then we'll do it.
Okay.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Left Bank Books. And thanks, Stephen, for coming out tonight. I really appreciate all of you coming as well. So, pleasure.
Great. Well, glad to be in conversation. If you haven't read the book yet, please put that on your to-do list after tonight's presentation. I'm going to kind of open with a little bit of sort of background on what St. Louis's bar inventory has been over the years and kind of parlay that into our conversation with Greggor tonight. So over the years, the research we've done here in St. Louis, St. Louis's first really clearly identified gay bar was in the 30s, Dante's Inferno, which would have been down, if you're at the Fox Theater on Olive, you can go head down that strip. Dante's Inferno would have been, as far as we know, the again, a modern definition and the back of the day definitions are different. So Greggor will probably talk a little bit about that in terms of how we're going to cut our numbers tonight, because my numbers are different than his numbers and those numbers are different than other numbers. So, but I've counted at least 220 or 30 what we would call a gay bar that have been in St. Louis since the 30s, which is a lot. And that includes Metro East. And so, as we go in our count, we go beyond the city limits. And, St. Louis is very protective of its, region, because we have some issues with the way we count things here in the city. So we, over those years, have had highs and lows. We've had probably upwards near 20 bars at a time. And I think my count is 11 at the moment. I think yours is a little less than that, but I count the east side. So again, I'm counting the old school definition of a gay bar, not and again, this is just generational gaps here of not a bar that's like, well, we're open to everyone, but a bar that is exclusively identified as a gay bar. Now, back in the day, the gay bars, there could have been a gay bar that wasn't gay owned, and vice versa. We were talking earlier about a gay owner who really didn't market to gays. So there's like, just because you're, back in the day, even if you were gay owned, it doesn't mean you were a gay bar. So all that aside. So St. Louis's inventory has been rich, they've been diverse. St. Louis does not have a lesbian bar, and Greggor reminded me, Missouri doesn't have a dedicated lesbian bar. And so that's, you know, a big deal in terms of my lesbian friends who are older, and they sort of have adopted some bars, and they say they miss that, having that space. So that's part of the conversation tonight of how do generations feel about that, how do you know, modern day, you know, kids, I call them, how do they look at gay bars, and how do the elders look at them, and all that. So let's just start with, I know we'll kind of be with the beginning, you know, of your journey with one of your bars closing, and how that kind of got you thinking, and then how that led to, what I love in the book is, in the beginning of the book, he has a map of his journey across America, which is pretty cool. Let's see his journey. So we'll talk about, was that planned or happenstance? So how did that bar closing get all this started?
So I live in a small town outside Cleveland, Ohio. I have to drive 45 minutes to get to a gay bar. There's no gay bar in the county. The town that I live in has 2 liquor licenses, or for a long time only had 2 liquor licenses. So I had finished my first book and was shopping for a second project, and then my favorite gay bar closed. And it was one of these old school gay bars, like you had to be buzzed in, and there was a little camera, and if the bartender was busy, then you push the buzzer and you're just still standing there on the corner while the cars go by, and you feel like a dummy. All the windows were blacked out. When it was holiday time, they had crazy extravagant decorations, you know, like this time of year, there would be all sorts of Halloween stuff all over the bar, and then, you know, quickly take that all down so that it would be all Thanksgiving stuff, turkeys everywhere. And I liked this bar because when I moved to Ohio, I'm not from there, I'm from Washington State originally. I was really aware that Cleveland is a Black majority city, and most of the gay bars I went to were only white. And this was a bar that looked like the city. It was very racially diverse. It wasn't gender diverse, but it was just also really quirky. They had this courtyard in the middle, and there was this older Black man who would put on puppet shows, and they were never advertised, or at least I didn't see them advertised, but you know, you come to the gay bar, you see a dog puppet doing Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, just, you know, just another day at a gay bar. And then it closed, and the developers and the journalists who covered the closure were such assholes. They kept saying it was a nowhere, nobody lived there, nobody went there. It was totally an empty place, except it was full of sex workers and drug dealers, except those were us. Like, we were standing on the corner smoking cigarettes. We were the drug dealers. We were the sex workers, except it was just us. And it made me really mad, so I wrote a little essay for a local magazine, and it crashed their server because 10,000 people read it in a weekend, and the developers threatened to sue me because I had slandered him, because he's like, I'm not anti-gay, I voted for Obama. I'm for same-sex marriage. And that was what convinced me that people really cared, and not just gay people, but straight people were really curious too. And all the information I could get my hands on about what was going on with gay bars was coming out of San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. And those places are important, but most of us don't live in those 4 cities. 85% of queer people live someplace other than those 4 cities. And almost all of what we know comes out of these places that have a gay press. And it certainly didn't describe what was going on in Cleveland. Like, gentrification is a problem in big coastal cities, but cities like St. Louis and Cleveland, our problem is since banking deregulation, all of our savings accounts go sloshing towards the coast looking for big returns in mega condos. And so we're sort of starved of development money, and the local money that we put in our local Bank of America branch is not being invested in St. Louis, it's going to the coasts. So reading about what was going on in these bigger cities, I felt like there was a real gap. And part of that gap was, I'm from a small town outside Portland, Oregon. That's where I grew up. I live in a small town outside Cleveland. These are not big major cities, and I've always been sort of a small town person. And so I wanted to know what was going on in the country. And so then I put on my sociologist hat and pulled out my Damron guides. I had bought my first Damron guide in 1997 when I graduated from college because I wanted to get laid. When I traveled around the country, I had these big fantasies that were mostly unfulfilled. But if you don't know these Damron guides, you can go to www.mappingthegayguides.org. And it's a team of researchers, and they have digitized these were, before there was Yelp, these were physical guidebooks that had all LGBTQ plus places, and they had a very idiosyncratic sort of coding schemes to tell you, like, G next to the bar meant that it was a lesbian bar because G meant girls. I'm trying to remember something. PE. If you had to wear a dinner jacket to go to the gay bar, like old-fashioned piano bars, it would be labeled PE, which stood for piss elegant. SM stood for some motorcycles, but really actually was a BDSM bar. Like they were very clever in the way that they coded them. But I went through all the old Damrons to sort of count up to find out that between 2002 and 2023, 45% of gay bars have closed. So we lost about almost half in the last 21 years. And I wanted to know, what does that say about our relationship to physical places? I don't want to slam online. I met my ex online. I met other people who could have been exes online. And I really envy young people today who can log on to TikTok and watch people who look like them or talk like them or aspirationally who they want to look like, and flip through and just see an endless stream of non-binary people sort of telling them that everything's going to be okay. Like, I think that's great. And I think the pandemic reminded us, the COVID-19 pandemic reminded us that there's something very human about our need for physical places. I was very moved during the pandemic when people were writing these blogs about, like, I miss the lady at the grocery store, or I miss seeing the person's face at the gas station. And we missed our local bookstores, and we missed our local bars and our local restaurants. And there is something human about needing to be in the presence of other people like us, however you define that. And so I wanted to know, how is that relationship changing as more and more of our life moves online, and more of our places are transforming themselves to meet new needs while retaining older patrons? That was a long answer for a short question.
So we have your map in the book. How strategic was the journey, or was some of it happenstance? Did you specifically go to seek out a certain bar, or what was your strategy?
So at the time, my partner said, I was like, I'm going to go on a road trip. I'm going to go to gay bars. And he was like, you can be gone for a month. And I was like, well, that means 31 days. So I plotted. I have some minimal geocoding skills. So I plotted, I counted up I was particularly interested in gay bars that are more than an hour's drive from the nearest other gay bar, because it turns out the most common kind of gay bar is a bar that's the only one in its city. I know we normally think of gay bars in gay neighborhoods. Those are special, those are rare. The most common type of gay bar is the only one. So I made a map of these, and I drew a line and plotted a course from Ohio to DC to Florida to Dallas to Oklahoma through Missouri and up back Illinois and over. 17 states, 31 days. I think I did 60 gay bars in 31 days. So some days I was driving 3 hours in between gay bars, and it was very idiosyncratic who responded. I was complaining earlier. You go to you call and the phone is disconnected, or the answering machine is full, or the voicemail box doesn't accept messages. And then you reach out on Facebook and you realize nobody has updated the Facebook page since 2009. So probably that's some old bartender's account who took the password with them. So I did this and I started making presentations on these 17 bars. And my colleagues in academia were very snobby, and they were like, this doesn't describe America. This only describes the Midwest. And I'm like, no, I went to Florida and Alabama. And they're like, well, the South and the Midwest. And I was like, but I went to West Virginia. And they're like, okay, Appalachia, Midwest, and the South. And I was like, and Texas. Texas is none of those. And people were like, well, you didn't do the coasts. So then the next summer, I went and did another 12 states through all of the northeastern states that had gay bars, including big cities, but also specifically looking for smaller cities that have gay bars, where the bar is often the hub of everything. Often it's the bar that organizes the Pride Parade or the Pride celebration, and if they don't organize it, they fund it. And if they do neither of those things, then the plotting often happens at the corner of the bar. And certainly it's the drag artists in the bar who are performing at the local Pride celebration. And when we have drag story hour, it's coming out of often the bars. And then I go to conferences, and I started shopping for conferences. So I went to conferences that I am not qualified to go to, but they were in cities that I decided needed to be covered. So I went to the International Theater Writers Conference in San Diego, California, because I decided I needed to go to San Diego. So it was a little bit of happenstance. I'm from the Northwest, so I went to all the bars in the Northwest in my parents' car. My brother had been divorced, had just gotten divorced, so I made him ride along with me through Eastern Washington. So a little bit of random, a little bit of strategy, and at the end, what I was really looking for was breadth. I wanted, when I started, I thought there was gonna be such a thing as a Southern gay bar or an Appalachian gay bar. And in the end, I found that these bars that are the only ones are just way more similar to each other. The bar in Florida and the bar in Eastern Washington State had much more in common with each other than they did to the bars in Seattle or Atlanta, because these little one-stop shop, do everything, everybody has to go to the same place whether they like it or not. That, I think, reflects more of where we're at in the movement than big cities where we can only hang out with people like us in a very limited sense. So.
Well, your stop closest to us was in Cape Girardeau at Independence Place.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about your trip to Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
Yes, I didn't know how you pronounced it. And had I known Cape Girardeau.
Yeah. Or just Cape.
Or just Cape.
Cape Town?
The fact that I learned after I submitted the manuscript is that Cape Girardeau is Rush Limbaugh's hometown. And had I known that, it would have been in the book. So now you know, always you wish you would have put more in there. We drove I had an undergraduate research assistant who had just graduated, and I flew them from San Francisco to Lake Charles, Louisiana, because that's where I was in my route. And they came with me to sort of, as a queer femme, to sort of offset my bare cis energy so that we would sort of tag team these interviews. And they are from St. Louis. So we cut across Missouri, starting in Joliet. And at the time that we were there, there was a gay bar in Joliet called Equality Rocks. And it was interesting, like it was supposed to be kind of an HRC, big tent sort of gay bar for everyone. But because Equality Rocks initials are ER, the inside was hospital themed. So it kind of had a Dr. Frankenfurter sort of interior, that like there were IV bags for cocktails. And I mean, it was very elaborate, this mad scientist laboratory sort of theme of the bar. And they were very proud because they had lost this gay bar when there was a tornado some years ago. And so there was a new gay bar. And then it closed like within weeks after we had left. And so then that whole region, there was no gay bar within 140 miles of Joliet. It turns out the drag artists reorganized themselves, and they were having monthly drag shows at the bowling alley. And so that just shows you how resilient we are. Like, we will have a party somewhere, and it may not have a liquor license, but if it's got bowling, you know, there's nothing more gay than bowling. And then we went to Cape Girardeau because it was one of these places that is more than an hour's drive to the nearest gay bar. And do you know this movie? God, what's the name of that movie? Not that one. What a dump.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Well, that's actually a quotation. It's a quotation of, it has Mildred Pierce. It's Mildred Pierce, yes. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is quoting Mildred Pierce. But anyways, so I only bring this up because when we queers call something a dump, it can be loving and it can be affectionate. And I'll just leave it there. The bar, you had to walk through like a rusty fence, and there was some drywall and an abandoned sink, and you went up these kind of rickety stairs. And then when you came into the place, it was this glittering palace of tinsel and all the LGBT flags. All the flags were everywhere. And you know, you had this sort of whiplash that before you thought you were in some suburban backyard where you were going to get tetanus, and now suddenly you were actually going to get a kiss from a drag queen. And it was one of these show bars. It had a very detailed list of all the title holders of Miss Independence Place going back 30 years. Of, you know, and you could see the shift in the trends of drag queen names, you know, how drag queens name themselves changes over time. And so you saw that the early ones were sort of Patty O'Furniture, and by the end you get to Sausage or whatever. And the owner wasn't able to meet us, but the show director was, and she was quite a figure. Blanche Dubois, not to be confused with that Blanche Dubois or the other Blanche Dubois, or if you go Googling for the drag queen named Blanche Dubois, there's many. But yeah, she had very strong views on what drag should or shouldn't be, and that is interesting at the current moment because I think we were there in 2018 before the COVID-19 pandemic, but the big debate was what drag should be was being driven by a particular TV show. You may have heard of it. What's it called again? I forgot. RuPaul's Drag Race. And the show, of course, has brought drag to very many more suburban and straight people than who ever had access before. But the show also acts as a gatekeeper for what kinds of drag are show-worthy. And I would say this was a show director who had ideas that were pretty firmly in line with RuPaul's about what works on stage and what doesn't. Facial hair does not work. Female illusionism more than gender bending performance. And that was an interesting conversation for us to have in the context of what drag was like. So, you know, yes, in a book that has 39 chapters, they are all very short. The chapter on drag is about Missouri. It's about Cape Girardeau, because I found that that bar was exactly at where the conversation was at that time in the US.
I want to kind of delve into, you know, through the journey of two themes. Maybe we could start with sort of that, typical urban versus rural discussion of what were some of your impressions of just, as you kind of mentioned, some similarities that people might have been, surprised by. What was some comparing and contrasting just in general about rural and urban bars, that you visited over the course of 2 years?
So I sort of divide them up between big cities, smaller cities, and then small towns. And there actually in some ways aren't that many small town gay bars, although it's very interesting when you ask. I had a student who said, I'm from a small town in North Carolina. And I was like, oh, tell me about your small town. And they were like, Durham. And I'm like, that is more than 120,000 people. My graduating class was 139. So I'll tell you what a small town is. So in big cities, gay bars can specialize. And sometimes this is great. Sometimes it's the performance, artsy, sort of gender bendy, bingo, extravaganza, sort of specialized niche thing. It can also be the bar for older cis white gay men and nobody else. But you can specialize like that in a big city. In smaller cities, you cannot. And the pressures on gay bars to be open to everyone, and we can talk about that in a bit, but bars now, the pressure is both economic and cultural. We need to be accepting of everyone. If we want them to accept us, we need to accept them in our space. That pressure has been in small cities and small towns for a much longer time. And so it was very interesting to have big cities saying, we're being invaded by straight people recently, which I can understand how disturbing that would be. We can only imagine how the reverse would be equally disturbing. But in small cities, gay bars always had more than half of their patrons were straight people. And I had expected to hear these small city bars to say, economically, we just can't survive. There's only 50 of us in this town. I mean, I went to a small town that was 16,000 people and they had a gay bar. And I expected him to say, economically, we can't survive without the straights. And what he said was, I am one of 9 kids and I wasn't gonna open a bar where my sisters and brothers couldn't come support me. And I am really close to my friends from high school and I want them to come to support me. So what I heard was, in some ways very radical. I wanted to be LGBTQ plus in the place that I was from, and I was gonna make the world I wanted to live in where I was. Now, these places were not politically radical, and some cases they weren't even politically progressive. But I think there's something radical about living in the place, blooming where you were planted in that way. We have a question here.
Yeah, I was upstairs. My dad says I have to go. Would you mind if I could get the autograph?
Absolutely. Someone's got to go, so we're going to autograph.
Sadly. Sadly, I go. I wish I could stay longer.
No problem. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Goodbye. So the smaller city gay bars, big city gay bars that are feeling recently invaded by straight people can look to these smaller cities for how did they manage to survive where most of the patrons are straight and yet the queer character and the queer culture of the place blossomed. And so in big cities, I think sometimes they feel like they're being diluted by straight people. But I think there's a lesson here to look at the small city places and show it doesn't have to be a dilution, it can be a blossoming in all senses. Similarly, only in big cities with gayborhoods did I find lesbian bars. Lesbian bars, when I started this project, there were only 15. I think right now we're up to 29. So actually, the press love a story about the failing lesbian bar. And every time I talk to a journalist, I'm like, we have nearly doubled the number of lesbian bars in the last 5 years. So yes, 29, not that many nationally. That's abysmal. But it's almost twice as many as we had 5 years ago. That's a story of success and blossoming, not a story of lesbian bed death, which is, I think, what journalists are very invested in. So having a big city where we can subdivide was a place where lesbians, gender non-binary, and trans folks could have their own space. And so that also is a special part that was getting lost in some of these discussions about gay bars going away.
Following this theme of the journey. So, we're talking, the modern era of generations of ordering online versus us who had to go out on the hunt. And the West End was my, coming out neighborhood in the late 80s. There is no longer a gay bar in St. Louis's original neighborhood. And I have a real strict, I'm kind of like the RuPaul thing, I have a very strict definition of a neighborhood. Live, work, play, not just a couple bars where you go party at and leave. And so I argue with people about, is the Grove really a true neighborhood in the sense of, there have been bars there, but you look at West End and Soulard and Lafayette Square where it was a live, work, play. People, did all that and win one spot versus just going, to a bar at night. So anyway, setting that aside, the generation gap discussion of as you traveled, what did you sense in terms of, a lot of my older friends, especially the ones who travel over in San Francisco and some of the bars they would call a glass casket where you would sit at the window and the older guys would be sitting there. The Twin Peaks Tavern. And my research the last 10 years, I found younger audiences very interested in queer history, yet it's hard for them to put themselves in a spot where, so you had to go out and go to bars and parks and bathhouses and all that stuff that's very foreign to someone who only known an online life. And so they were fascinated by all those stories. It's like, oh wow, that sounds interesting. So as you were traveling to bars, when you encountered different, ages, did you find some interesting observations on what younger people felt? And again, this may be because there was only one bar in town versus a big city where there's several. What were some impressions of younger audiences' views of the gay bar and the role versus older generations who had always had a bar as part of their life?
Sure. So I'm trained as a social scientist. I did not write the book as an academic book. It's written for people, not academics. And I am trained to look for patterns. And I went looking I really expected to find older versus younger. I really expected to find a generational thing. And instead, what I found was the radical provincialism of queer life. Queer life is very different depending on where you are in the country. And sometimes that means 3 hours down the road. So I would be in one city with one gay bar and I'd interview the owner and he'd tell me, thank God for my seniors. If it wasn't for the hard drinking seniors, I wouldn't be in business. Young people don't go out anymore. They're all on Grindr. And I'd go 3 hours down the road and they'd be like, thank God for Gen Z. Old people just stay home and watch Netflix. It's the young people who are keeping me in business. And these were cities that were very similar to each other economically. The only thing that was different was one had a culture of young people going out and the other one had a culture of older people going out. Frequently, my elders are telling me gay bars are a young person's game. And I'm like, have you been to the White House Inn in Charleston, West Virginia at 3:00 on a Tuesday? It's the seniors who are holding down the bar and they are hilarious and they will buy me a drink because I'm still young and cute. And even when I'm almost 50, I can be young and cute. And so it's not that that any particular bar is a young person's game or not. It really depends on the local culture. And the best example I have for you is at the time when I was doing this research, there were only 2 cities in the US that had more than one lesbian bar. And both of them had 3 lesbian bars. What 2 cities in America in 2018 had 3 lesbian bars?
Is one of them Memphis?
No, but that's not a bad guess.
Nashville?
Not a bad guess, but no. Oklahoma City
Okay.
and New York City. Both of the cities. Both cities with city in the name. So, I wanted to know, why does Oklahoma City have 3 lesbian bars? And the answer is just, Oklahoma City lesbians like to party and they go out. And because they go out, those bars are fun to go to. They've got potlucks, they've got dart tournaments, they've got bingo. There are fun things to do. And in other cities, it's just not that culture. And sometimes it's because people are doing outdoorsy things. And those are nice too, I hear. But I don't remember your question. Oh, I was on a tear, but I wasn't answering your question. Oh, younger versus older. I teach a lot of underage 18 to 20-year-olds. And they are very curious about gay bars. I still think that going to a gay bar is a rite of passage that first time. I don't know that it has that sense of terror that it used to have, because I think now gay bars are so mediated that, we've seen them in movies, we've seen them in Glee. I went to the gay bar that inspired the gay bar in Glee in Lima, Ohio. But I think gay bars fail to live up to their movie representations, because I love gay bars in the movies because they have the whole village people is at the bar. There's the leather daddies and the cowboys and the lesbians and the college kids, and everyone's at the bar together, and that's nice, but it doesn't actually happen that way. I think the biggest challenge, not just for young people, but for all of us, is I think we're being taught that gay bars are there to entertain us. And in olden times, gay bars were there for us to entertain each other. And I think when people used to go to the gay bar 3 times a week, it wasn't so much that they were going there to drink, although they were also drinking, but you went there because it was totally entertaining. People were funny, and they were funnier than what was on TV. Now that's a lot harder because there's an infinite stuff on TV. There's always something funny on TV. And let's face it, we have lost some of our conversational skills. And that is not just young people. Old people are just as guilty of sitting at the bar and going like this and not looking at each other. And so several owners, especially in smaller places, not so much in big cities, said that they trained their staff to direct patrons. Have you two met each other? And I'm gonna just take that phone, ha ha ha, you can have it back when you meet someone else. And so they were doing little shtick, kind of a shtick to force people to meet each other. But one of the things that is a very human thing is meeting someone you didn't know before. And one of the problems I think with apps is the problem with apps is twofold. One is you can filter out the people you don't think you're gonna like, and you can decide ahead of time what those people are without actually meeting people who aren't like you. And I think this especially drives a wedge between us and our elders, filtering out by age. I think the second problem with the apps is they don't permit three-way conversations in the way that in a bar, you and your friend start a funny conversation and the next thing you know, there's 5 of you talking together. And that kind of conversation where you don't necessarily want to sleep with them, and maybe you don't even want to be friends with them, but you're willing to argue with them at least until your one drink is done. And that kind of talking and conversation is something that apps haven't replicated, not even Lex, and Lex is the one that's closest. Lex is for lesbians, gender non-binary and trans people, if you don't know Lex. I only know Lex because my students have taught me about Lex. This is the great thing of being a professor of sexuality.
I founded the Sis History Project because when I came out in '87, and when I was a lot younger, in my 20s, my friends would make fun of me because I would be sitting at the bar at Mags or wherever, and I would be talking to older folks, and I was so interested in their stories. One of my early friends was Betty Davis. If anyone of a certain age knows Betty Davis, Jimmy Walker, who was a well-known drag queen in St. Louis, Jimmy. And I became friends, but at first, very, the top kind of, not really a drag performer so much, but a drag persona. So Jimmy and I became friends, and he was telling me all these great stories, and I never recorded Jimmy's life. And when Jimmy passed, I felt, man, this is not good. We're not capturing our elder stories and documenting, preserving, and celebrating their lives. So that was kind of my inspiration here locally to get things started, just by sitting at a bar listening to a story and not doing anything about it. So I think that over the years I've seen some of that intergenerational stuff. You still have, I can remember, I'll never be old, and when you get old, it's like, nobody wants to look at me anymore, so you have all that, going on. So, okay, so I really do, only because I'm intrigued, and I'm not sure our host went on time, so she can keep us on the straight and narrow here. I want to talk about Hawaii and Alaska. So tell us a little story about going to Wayne Chung's in Honolulu and the Raven in Anchorage.
Okay, I will tell these 2 stories, but then we're going to turn it over to you all for questions, because I really want to know what you want to know. I went to a conference in Honolulu and did interviews at the bars there, and why it was important for me to go to Hawaii was I was looking for a bar that was by and for Asian American and Pacific Islander queer people. And Honolulu is more than 50% AAPI, and so I thought, if there's going to be a bar that is by and for queer Asian folks, it's going to be there. And I found it. It was by this Chinese American, but his mom was from Vietnam, but the bar was Japanese themed. So he was Chinese American, but it had all of this Japanese kitsch. And the bar was super fun. Of course, it's a karaoke bar. It's Hawaii. Like Hawaii, nobody does karaoke like Hawaiians in the United States. And nobody does karaoke in Hawaii like the Filipinos. Like that is the place where you go to see. And you can hear my voice. My singing voice sounds a lot like this, people who sing there sound like, you know, they're gonna go on The Voice, and that's just their drunk voice, like not even their like practice voice. So the bar was really interesting because it was kind of making fun of Japanese people, or I perceived it, but the bar wasn't for me. And so what I wrote about was my discomfort in even critiquing this bar that was clearly not for me, and it wasn't by me, but there was a neon sign that said, Aroha bitches. And no, Aroha beaches. That's what it said, Aroha beaches. So it was sort of making fun of broken English, which when Asian Americans were posing underneath it for Instagram, it was sort of a gentle ribbing maybe of their grandma's accent. But then when you have white folks posing under this same sign, it just doesn't land the same. And so it's a chapter that's about how context really matters about what counts as a gay bar, but also who the bar is for and how humor doesn't always travel. Things that are funny in the gay bar are not necessarily going to be funny at work, depending on your work. I hope that you have a job where it can be that funny. I went to Alaska totally arbitrarily. Because of this trip, I had been to 49 of the 50 states, and the only one that was left over was Alaska. And I had tracked down this story of, you know how every gay bar has a bucket of condoms? And usually that bucket of condoms has a sign that says, take a condom, reduce HIV. Those signs are a scientifically proven public health measure. And the research study that proved that they were effective was done in Anchorage, Alaska. And the Raven was one of the bars where that research was done. So I interviewed the researcher who had been doing her undergraduate thesis at the University of Anchorage in the 80s. And she designed this study, and I got to talk to her, and then I went to the bar, and because it's me, I was on sabbatical, so I took my parents to Alaska in April. It snowed every single day. We went on a boat ride. It was super, like, the seawater was freezing. So I had my real Alaska experience, but the bar is super friendly. And the thing about gay bars, every gay bar is special. My number one critique of the book is, why didn't you study my gay bar? I just got a very angry Facebook message. Why did you study Dallas and not Houston? Everyone knows only the shallow people think Dallas is interesting and Houston is so much better. And it's true, I am shallow. But the thing about the Raven, all these gay bars every gay bar is so idiosyncratic. The bar in State College, Pennsylvania, their special thing is they showed Jeopardy. They've showed Jeopardy for 35 years on the bar, and when the bar was closed, they were trying to stream Jeopardy on Zoom so that the people who come for Jeopardy could still get Jeopardy while the bar was being renovated. And at the Raven, they all gather to watch the 5 o'clock news, and they roast the journalists. So it's the funniest thing, like, he thinks that tie looks cute kind of stuff, or like, she pointed to the wrong side of the map when she said it was going to be 27 degrees tomorrow or whatever. So why I wanted to feature this bar in Alaska was, I can't imagine a more out of the way place, and yet this gay bar played an important part in AIDS history, and every little gay bar has played its own important part in AIDS history. And it closes the book by saying, please write these stories. I only scratch the surface, so please tell us your stories because they're important.
Well, that's a great segue into asking folks to ask some questions. You need to pass the mic, or does it?
I can pass the mic. I'll take one of them.
Walter.
Okay, Yes, you remember. Thank you. I have a question. Well, first of all, I want to say the developer of the Lex app lives in St. Louis. So if you need to interview someone while you're here, I can get. But
Go to St. Louis.
The other thing I wanted to ask was, so a lot of people blame Grindr on kind of like, not the death of the gay bar, but the diminishment. But I always think of like another parallel phenomenon is like coffee shops. Like when I was kind of like a young millennial, I thought like, and I actually am from Eastern Washington, I thought like the Seattle coffee shop was the coolest thing. And one day I want to live in a city that has a coffee shop like that. And then when I grew up and moved to bigger cities, one of the problems that happened is, at least I interpret it this way, that coffee shops became much more about like volume and pushing people through, and not this sort of like, oh, this is a place you can hang out and meet people, and there are artsy people that go there. And now in bigger city, and even like in St. Louis, like coffee shops are really, really expensive and they're really, really bad. And partly the problem with it is because they have to justify their rent. And commercial rents have gone up so much. And I think with gay bars, that's often like a case where suddenly like rent will go up and they can't justify having a space where they sell like $4 mixed drinks, like you can in like a lot of places in St. Louis. And so I wonder if you saw that phenomenon in a lot of the cities you were in. But I feel like that's really contributed to a lot of like these third places being shut down because they just can't afford to be a space where someone can go in and not spend like a ton of money, and still have a good time and meet people like them or different from them, whatever the case may be, and have those kind of interactions.
People blame Grindr, and I think we need to blame screens. People stay home and watch cable TV. Succession is very engaging, but it's not queer. And it's not taking you outside the house. And I am as guilty of this as anybody. I like to stay home and watch TV. I am too lazy to go out. And it's screens. Grindr is just one small thing. I think DoorDashing our food does the same thing to restaurants as staying home and buying box wine is for the gay bar. The one thing I will say for mass market coffee, as I was driving around the country, of course I support indies. I always support an indie cafe, but often my only choice was between Truck Stop Coffee and Starbucks Coffee. And often in this country, the only place I could see visibly queer people was Starbucks baristas. So shout out to all the undercuts, the purple dye, the queer button, the y'all means all buttons that I saw at the Starbucks. So they are providing a place for queer youth to hang out, even in some places that I think from the coast we are trained to see as inhospitable. But for these folks, this is just the place you go. And some places it's the Starbucks. Where I grew up, it was the Denny's. In other places, it's the Waffle House. Like, we have always had our places. So they don't necessarily have to be gay themed in that way. But I think one of the most interesting things business-wise for gay bars is we don't have a chain. There is no Red Robin of gay bars. Now there's Hamburger Mary's, which is the closest thing that we've got, and I know you've got one here, right? It's still, no? Okay. But Hamburger Mary's is the closest thing we've got to a chain, and even it is very idiosyncratic in where it flourishes and where it doesn't. I mean, we've got a great. Where else could you get Lady Bunny to go to Toledo, Ohio, than to the Hamburger Mary's? So, no one has really, other than that, has come up with a franchise bar model. And maybe that's okay. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I mean, my main one was just like, did you find that like commercial spaces were becoming too expensive? Like rent was too expensive? On
the coast, rents are becoming too expensive. Yes, you've got to have a $25 cocktail and you've got to have big covers in order to give the artists and the DJs what they need. But there's I mean, you can't tell me that all the real estate in St. Louis is too expensive, because it certainly isn't in Cleveland. And our places have always been pushed around. We are the artsy, creative, scrappy, do it on a shoestring kind of folks. And so we will find that place to make that happen.
Really? Oh my God, really?
Even if it ends up somewhat being online.
I don't have time for that, but that's, I wish you did. I'm from OK. I'm from the city.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so the last place is Oklahoma is OK.
If someone were to come to you in the present and want to open up a gay bar, what advice would you give them after all the different ones you saw and learned about?
I would want to know what is their plan for making this place inviting to all LGBTQ plus people. So I want across the alphabet, but I also want, how are you going to make this place represent the demographics of the city in which you are? And how are you going to do that through your programming? How are you going to do that through your staff hiring? How are you going to do that through your training? And how are you going to encourage patrons to be open to make this the kind of place that all of us want to be? Because it's only when you get all of us on the same page that the place then thrives in the presence of our straight allies. That's what I would say. And the other thing about straight allies is I love having them in the bars, because sometimes the gay bar is the gateway drug between the S and the B. And sometimes that's on the journey from the B to the something else. And sometimes the B is the destination. And so when people get I would have gay men say, oh, there's too many straight women in this bar. And I'm like, how do you know they're straight? Oh, well, I don't. And number two, when was the last time you took a straight woman friend to the bar? Well, last weekend. I'm like, you just don't like other gay men's best girlfriends. You only like your own. Don't be such a selfish, you know what. And also, they came to support us, like, party. That's what we're there for. There was a hand way in the back.
Yeah, I was curious when you were talking regarding your trip to Cape Girardeau. I know Cape Girardeau is a town that really flourishes because of their college. And these towns that are known, I would consider Cape Girardeau maybe not like a tiny town, but maybe a smaller town. So I'm interested in your experience visiting these small towns where their economy really runs around students, as opposed to small towns without any academia or university.
So almost every small city had at least a community college that has a gay bar. But there are plenty, what was fascinating to me was the number of big university cities that didn't have a gay bar. Athens, Georgia, famously quirky, home of REM and the B-52s, no gay bar. But they had Sister Louisa's Church of the Glory Hole, come on in, sweetheart, or something like that. The name was so long it doesn't fit on Yelp. University of Vermont, wherever city that's in, Burlington maybe. Anyways, they don't have a gay bar. So the presence of a big university isn't itself a guarantee that you're going to have a gay bar. And it was just very idiosyncratic. Some bar owners said, no one from the university has anything to do with us. They don't come. Maybe a couple of grad students, but it's only the locals. And other gay bars are like, thank God for the college. If it wasn't for this endless stream of young people coming in, we wouldn't be open. So I haven't quite figured out how to make sense of just how provincial we are. And I don't mean provincial in a bad way, because I am a provincial person with provincial tastes. I mean, we are so very local. I think we like to pretend that LGBTQ plus means the same thing everywhere. And I think those of us who have moved know how our identities shift and morph to fit into the new box in which we find where we are living. There's a great book about how being a lesbian is totally different in different parts of the country. It's called How Places Make Us. It's very sociology, so it might be it's not a beach read, but I love this book because it shows that our identities are so dependent on who are the people around us. And I think that's just I lost my train, but yes.
What was the book called?
The book is called How Places Make Us by Japonica Brown Saraceno, and it's a great book.
Did you see many gay dance bars?
Do you mean strip clubs?
Okay.
No, I meant.
You mean like dance clubs?
Yes, yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so when I came out in the early 90s, big gay dance clubs were the thing, and those have gone away. People don't go out dancing in that way anymore. And I think that's just, I think we're on I think this is a cyclical thing. I think it's going to come back. The fact that EDM and electronic dance music is now a generic pop style, and so much of our pop music is actually made for the club. It's just there are no clubs in which we play these things very much anymore. I honestly think it's going to come back, but yes, certainly I went to some large dance clubs. I write about Club Cobra in Los Angeles. You know, it's a club that can have hundreds of people. It's in a city that's half Latina. It was a Latina dance club. They got shut down in COVID and they moved on to OnlyFans. So they had their go-go dancers and their drag artists performing on OnlyFans, which propelled them into the top 3% of accounts. And there was no nudity. It was just, we are bringing you the club. And so I think there is a hunger for that kind of experience. The fact that every big Hollywood movie has like a giant dance club scene, I think that is whetting people's appetite. So I think dancing is going to come back.
No questions from online?
Any other questions to wrap up tonight's event? Okay.
Did you think about alcoholism or alcohol abuse in the gay community?
Absolutely. Like the theme of the book is ambivalence, and I am ambivalent about our number. Gay bars are by far the most common LGBTQ plus place. Like not centers, not cafes, not restaurants, not beaches. All of those are important, but I'm really ambivalent about them being organized around substances. Even as I myself love a drink, I have plenty of friends in recovery who do not feel comfortable going to the place that is supposed to be for us. And so, yes, I write about that. I write about bar owners who don't drink anymore. And the trend, to go back to what would my advice be, bars that have opened in the last 5-10 years, many of them have very detailed non-alcoholic cocktail menus, and some of them even have them on draft, so that you can have a very nice specialized drink that you can't get at home, that is fancy, that feels like going out, and that's alcohol-free. And I think the Dry January movement, you know, not drinking alcohol in January, which I have been doing, I find it difficult, but I feel like I should do it. If it's difficult, I should do it. I think that's more and more bars are going to not just have to do Shirley Temples and I'll give you soda water with a lime in it. I think they're going to have to do a little more because more and more of us want to have just one drink. And to offer something else is what will keep us there for more than an hour.
Oh, there's this.
Could you talk about some of the non-bar things that bars do, like especially in smaller towns, smaller cities, like the other sort of community building things you mentioned, pride organizations, stuff like that.
There was a bar in McAlester, Oklahoma. This is a town of 16,000 people, and they were having a queer film festival. Like, I really think this was like Blockbuster videos on a TV, but I can guarantee that before or since there were not, thanks to Fat Mary's, kids and young adults in McAlester, Oklahoma had a queer film festival. I think it can range from really little things. I took a lot of pictures of bulletin boards in gay bars, and to me, one of the non-bar things that they do is you're queer, you're having trouble getting a job because of people are assholes or they don't like the way that you look, but you're gonna walk dogs and mow lawns. Where do you put up your things? Your little strips so that people can get your number, like you go to the gay bar. When you're looking for a roommate in a place when maybe you don't want to expose yourself to Craigslist or online, go hang it up in the gay bar. Babysitting, all sorts of these kinds of services. Where are the AA groups that are accepting going to be advertised? I was really obsessed with these bulletin boards, and the analog bulletin board lives very healthily in many gay bars. So what were some, I think the art on the walls where bars will put local artist stuff, and whether this is, you know, have you ever seen the welded, it's like garden trowels to make them look like chickens? You know, that kind of art. Like, that's art and someone made it and they're queer and you should buy it because it's in a gay bar. That kind of art, to this sort of knockoff Tom of Finland, ooh, let's be sexy and draw a penis kind of art. Like, all of that. Like, I think of that as something that showcases what are local people concerned with. And then watching Alex Trebek, RIP, at the gay bar with other people who have catty comments or we have a unique sense of humor. Lesbian camp, queer camp, we need a place for that humor to flourish, because most of us don't learn that humor from our parents. Most of us are not so fortunate as to be born into LGBTQ plus families. So I think of gay bars as a reservoir of humor, and I think that humor really sustains us. And so having a place where you learn why things are funny, even when they're tragic, like, that's to me what's important about a gay bar.
Maybe one more question, or is that it for tonight?
Online?
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up.
Yes, well, Elena, thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you both so much.
Stephen, thank you again for coming out, and thanks Left Bank Books. Please buy something on your way out. And I'm happy to sign books if anyone wants a signature.
So we have copies available at the front desk, and Greggor will be here for signing for a little bit longer, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, so would you mind taking our photo like that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Get this on social media.
Yes. I forgot your name.
Josiah.
Josiah,
Yeah.
right, you told me earlier.
No worries.
That's so nice.
And there was another Washingtonian.
Yes.